South Africa's properties and suburbs were not designed for the reasons that you think. Now, some of them were built on top of gold mines, some of them were shaped by strange laws such as banning of horses. Now, who would think our little horsey would catch a stray bullet? Some of them exist because of political scandals, and a few others are stories you would have never expected. Some you might even swear are fiction, okay? But today we're only going to delve into some of the weirdest, unbelievable property stories in South African history so that you can understand how they shape the property prices you see today on your Property 24. So I'm Kahana Sudupani. Join me in this journey. Comment and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Story number one. There's a gold mine in Joburg in the in the 1880s. All right, so 1886, gold is discovered in the Witwatersrand area, which is now known as Johannesburg. And suburbs like Parktown, Yeoville, Observatory, and Kensington become the first suburbs to exist. Why were they developed? Well, Parktown was founded by the landlords who wanted to basically become the mining elite, and they built massive mansions overlooking the city. Yeoville was then marked as, this healthy place that you could live in that was outside the mining smog and pollutant. And then Kensington and Observatory were planned along the ridges that were left untouched by the mining shafts. So basically these areas were built along the lines of mining. So it's not necessarily planned as a city, Johannesburg, that is. It is as a result of mining. The twists and turns that you see in Parktown, those are along mining lines. Interesting. So, what do you think about that? Now this perhaps tells you that Johannesburg was not necessarily developed. It was actually improvised around the gold rush. Story number two was very interesting to me when I discovered it, is that there was a law that they set in place that you are supposed to eliminate horses from certain suburbs or areas. Why was this a brazen or bizarre law in South African history? Well, it implemented the restriction of horse stabling on residential property plots. Why did they want this to happen? They wanted quieter streets because horses make a lot of noise on the streets. They wanted no smells, our little horses catching strays, and they wanted zero working class transport in the neighborhoods, meaning the working class used horses to get around places, and they did not want these horses to be in the rich neighborhoods. And so one of the earliest things that this did and created was a low density suburban living, bigger stands, huge stands at that, and what we now call in Johannesburg as the leafy suburbs. And this basically created a place where you can't necessarily build lots of flats, you can't necessarily subdivide the land easily, and of course, you can't increase the supply of that place. And so the horses are gone, but that's something that remains in the property pricing of South Africa even today. The big plots of land still have an impact on how much we pay for land in this Joburg area. Now, the South African law accidentally created millionaires without noticing. See, in 1990, there was a land reform policy that accidentally turned ordinary South Africans into millionaires by mistake, literally overnight. Under the discount benefit scheme, the government basically said that houses that were state-owned and where there were tenants living in state-owned houses were now allowed to buy their homes at massively reduced amounts, like 7,500. Imagine the days when rocks could still be squeezed. These are the times. 7,500 could get you an entire house in those days under this benefit scheme. And obviously what this did, it exploded urbanization. It basically gave proximity to highways and malls, and the growing demand for family homes just skyrocketed. Places like Eldorado Park, Lenasia South, Protea North, and parts of Archridgeville saw some of the huge jumps in valuation across the years because of that initial purchase. And some families have seen that they've bought a land for less than 10K, and the value of that property has gone over 900K to about 1.4 million in the current year, over 20 years, of course. And so this meant that this policy that was meant to transfer ownership from state to individuals ended up creating a generational wealth pocket in certain areas that basically designed affluence at its core, right? So one of the other things that happened is that the suburbs that were planned were then abandoned. We move now to Cape Town. In Cape Town, we have an interesting place. We have an interesting place called District 6. And District 6 was one of the most valuable pieces of land, but it could not be bought, right? Because the South African government at the time of apartheid basically did what we know as the Group Areas Act, evicting a lot of people who lived on the land of District 6. 60,000 people, to be exact, were evacuated from their houses at that time. And so the land, because it gained this reputation of being scarred and haunted by political radioactiveness, businesses particularly, were not pleased to invest in building property there. And to this day, there have been struggles in getting property to be built there because nobody wants to be seen as profiting from forced removals. And these are some of the weird things that shape the properties of our country. So I've just touched Joburg and Cape Town, but what are the lessons that we learn? Here are the key takeaways. The lessons that we learn is that because of all of this that has happened, we have odd boundaries. We have uneven pricing across Joburg and Cape Town. We have low density suburbs where people are protected and they're green zones, and these are kind of heritage neighborhoods, expensive as they may be. And what we realize is that these corridors of the housing situation in South Africa basically provide a map that looks normal at the face of it, but really if we look at the undertones beneath the suburbs, we realize that a lot of them were shaped by mining, by politics, by mistakes, and sometimes scandals. And so this history is just not a nice to know, right? It is something that lies at the core of South African property prices even today. Next week, we'll delve deeper into how you can benefit from knowing your country's property history. And this has been myself, Kakano Sidupani. If you liked this video up to this point, please do leave a like, share, and comment. And tell us if you think there were any more interesting stories about South African property history. Take care.